Welcome to episode 37 of the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast. Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm Jill. Welcome to the Becoming Ellie podcast, Fit Strong Women Over 50.
This podcast focuses on health and fitness for women over 50. We often interview experts to help us explore new ideas and inspire our listeners in the second half of their lives.
Yes, that's right. Besides the podcast, Chris and I also started the Becoming Ellie community, which gives us all the opportunity to discuss those new ideas and inspirations.
We have listeners and community members from all over the world: New Zealand, Australia, Europe, South Africa, and of course the United States.
If you're interested in becoming part of our community, go to our website, becomingellie.com, to see all the resources there.
You'll also find that we are active on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. And we also have a private Facebook group where we discuss what we're doing to be fit and strong.
If you're new to our podcast, welcome. You might be wondering why this community is called Becoming Ellie. Ellie was the Norse goddess of aging. Legend has it that when Thor was challenged to a wrestling match with Ellie, everyone assumed that he'd win.
Yeah, that's right. And it was definitely a big surprise when Ellie defeated Thor. Jill and I decided we wanted to become fit and strong like Ellie. We named our group Becoming Ellie. That's E-L-L-I, because we are still becoming fit and strong while we age.
Eating healthy food is certainly part of fueling our bodies to be strong, and that is one reason why I was excited to interview Chef Laura Campbell.
Yes, Laura is a chef instructor for a ministry located in Cleveland, Ohio, and prior to that worked for Ohio's largest locally owned natural and organic health food store and restaurant.
Laura graduated from the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, and now brings over 20 years of experience in the hospitality industry.
I'm sure our listeners will enjoy hearing her thoughts on food, cooking, and healthy living.
Let's go to the podcast.
Today, we're so excited to have Laura Campbell with us. She's an expert as a chef educator and lecturer in Cleveland. Laura holds an associate's degree in Culinary Arts. And, I'm really interested. How did you get interested in learning about culinary arts? Because I know your undergraduate degree was Geology. Can you tell us what led you there?
The path was not exactly direct, as my parents could certainly attest, but it was a wonderful journey. And any education and any journey is, I always tell my students and anyone who asks me this question, it's always worthwhile. It gets you to where you are today. And while I was studying geology at the College of Wooster, I was working in a bagel shop from scratch where I would get up at 3 a.m. and run or ride my bike into Worcester and bake bagels and go back to class by 8 o'clock in the morning. And as I progressed towards my undergraduate degree in geology, I was absolutely in love with dinosaurs. Jurassic Park had just come out. I wanted to dig up dinosaurs. They don't really pay you to do that. It occurred to me as I was nearing the end of my education at Worcester, I needed to make a decision about whether or not to pursue something with geology or figure out something else to do. And the entire time I was working in this bagel shop, I realized how much I loved working with people. I loved hospitality. I became so enamored with it. And by graduation, I decided to continue an education in culinary arts. So that is what led me to the Culinary Institute of America out in Hyde Park, New York, about 1999. I headed out there.
So you basically graduated from college, said to your parents, all right, I have my degree in geology. Now I'm going to go learn how to be a cook. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
They were supportive.
Good. You got your degree from the Culinary Institute. Then you spent 4 years with Mustard Seed Market in Solon, Ohio.
Yes.
And for our listeners, the Mustard Seed Market is, well, how would you define it, Laura?
Well, mustard seed is really, it's a local group of grocery stores. There are 3 locations, and they really came about quite organically, kind of in response to not having a great place to go to pick up all natural, organic groceries and learn about the benefits of kind of a holistic approach to food as medicine way back in, I believe, the late 60s, early 70s. So it's been a family-owned grocery store ever since, and I ended up there working with a lot of people who were trying to deal with chronic illnesses. They were our customers, but I called them my clients. They weren't just grocery store customers. They were people in search of answers to their health issues via food, which I loved versus taking a pill. So I really discovered how much I loved communicating with my clients to help them not only fill their grocery basket, but to get a better sense of well-being through food.
Okay, so and what was your job there?
So I managed their bakeries, and we were a production facility for 3 different locations. So I'm a chef trained, but I'm also a pastry chef, and I love them both equally. Most chefs will tell you they cook, but they don't touch pastry, or they touch pastry, but they don't cook. I love both of those children equally, and I get very excited about teaching both. And there is certainly a place for sweets and sugar in the diet. Absolutely. And in a health food store, it was kind of a conundrum with people wanted, well, is there such thing as healthy dessert? And I really began to think about how to help the customers and clients view desserts when they're all natural, made from scratch, and made through kind of a labor of love, as that woven into a healthy diet, healthy lifestyle in general, and to not look at the nutritional information, look at what's in the food, look at what you're eating, and approach it from that angle. And that's kind of how I really got interested in helping people understand that sugar isn't all bad, fats aren't all bad. You really have to kind of look at it from the whole the perspective of the entire diet, the entire package of what you're eating and how you're eating it and who you're eating it with.
Wow. That's a very interesting way to look at things. Particularly the whole desserts. When you think of the pastries, I don't typically list them as one of my healthy choices. Now I want to continue to go through your background a little bit so that our listeners have a frame of reference of where you're coming from. But I understand now you work as an instructor and a chef at a nonprofit, the Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry.
Yes.
And the organization, from what I understand, provides innovative social enterprise job training. But if you could explain a little bit about who the organization serves and what you do and what the mission is of the nonprofit.
Yes, absolutely. LMM has been around in existence. This is actually our 50th year in existence, and it came about in answer to the Huff riots of the late 60s to serve those who are oppressed, forgotten, hurting. And my branch of LMM is called Workforce Development. And within Workforce Development, they have created a social enterprise to train people in the culinary arts. I have worked with populations through the Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Delay, through people getting recommendations from a men's shelter, maybe from their parole officer, their caseworker. And the third population that I've been serving most recently are a group of women through NERC, which is the Northeast Reintegration Center. It's a women's prison here in Cleveland. All of these populations are considered difficult to employ, traditionally speaking. And there is a lot of talk lately in the news, locally and nationally, about decreasing the rates of recidivism, specifically for women. Women's incarceration rates have gone up nearly 700% in the last 30 years. And of course, you incarcerate a woman for whatever reason. She most likely has children who depend on her. She certainly has family. Women traditionally have always kept those family units intact. Women are usually the providers of kind of the hearth. They are the communicators for sure. and the ripple effect of what happens, when women are incarcerated. So we're really kind of focusing on that. And I really have the privilege of working with these women and educating them. They come to our location Monday through Friday. They are released to our custody, and they get job training, culinary education, essentially everything that I would have learned at CIA. We are teaching them there, and we get them ready to re-enter the workforce. So it is incredibly rewarding, and also rewarding in the sense that I get to introduce these women to fruits and vegetables all day long that they may not have ever experienced. And I teach them how to cook them and to really honor the food. So it's really been truly the best job I've ever had.
Wow. And the women that you're educating, that you're working with, what do they go on to? What kind of jobs do they get?
They are employed. Actually, I have a few students who are employed at one of the best restaurants in Cleveland, the Marble Room. One was just given a promotion to head pastry chef.
Oh, wow.
Yes, if they stay in this career, and they don't have to. I'm not insulted if they choose something else, but getting out into the food industry is a great way to be reintroduced to society. And from there, they can only build upward. So we have students employed at a number of places around Cleveland. Some of them return to their homes, which may not be in Cuyahoga County, but the employment rate is quite high, as well as our graduation rate. Our recidivism rate is extremely low.
That's wonderful.
So what do you do sort of on a daily basis when you're working as an instructor and a chef there?
Well, on a daily basis, I work with the students. We do a lot of in-class lecturing, which of course begins with a lot of culinary history. And this is where finally I've been able to weave back into my curriculum some of what I learned way back at Wooster with my geology degree, when I learned a lot about evolution. And that really piqued my interest. And I do a lot of lecturing in class, but also on the side for anyone interested. Sometimes they're not interested, but I lecture them anyway because it's so fascinating to me. The fact that a lot of the reason why we are the human beings we are is because we were able to harness fire. So catching fire, not in the Hunger Games sense, but in the sense of humans harnessing the ability to create fire kind of on demand, and what that did for us as a species. And as far as we know, we're the only creature that cooks, and how that affected our brains, our guts, our evolution in general is so fascinating to me. And that's one of my favorite lecture topics to share. And from that, a lot of what we associate today emotion-wise with food, whether it's good or bad, is so tied back to that brain of our ancestors thousands of years ago, with the idea of light and fire and what it means. And it represents not only safe drinking water or a warm hearth, food, it represents community and basic hospitality. And I really think we're hardwired to recognize that light in the window as a safe harbor. And I don't think we realize that how much it's tied to that. We just know that feeling that's created when you see a light on somewhere and you're drawn to that. And that's very much tied back to what that represents for us as human beings, and the base thing of breaking bread together across all cultures. And as much as we, especially women, want to believe that it's love that ties everyone together, it's food, it's the hearth, and so much begins with that. And I try to bring people back around to the idea that food is powerful. It can be an enemy for us, especially in the West, especially as women. But if we really get back to the roots of why we cook and what that means as a society and the communication that happens over food, I try to get us to focus on that versus how many calories are in it or how much of that am I supposed to eat. And I try to help people have a different approach to cooking and maybe make a living doing so too.
But that's a good point. So even if they don't make a living cooking, you're still giving them lots of information and skills to take back to their family.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a whole different way of looking at things, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm sure it's rewarding to do that.
Oh, it
So
is.
when you're talking about how to cook and the different foods and all that, is there what are the key things that you stress to your students?
That they're in control of the food.
Okay.
But also that there's so much science behind it, and that cooking really has never been really a respected profession. And strangely, we have more people, I think, watching people cook on TV today than people actually cook for themselves at home. Everyone's in love with the Food Network and the celebrity cooking, and it looks as though those chefs are just arbitrarily throwing things in the pan or doing this. And it's really not. There's a lot more to cooking and to baking, certainly, than people realize. And if they understand the kind of the chemistry behind it, it's very much like learning a musical instrument, that you must learn the repertoire and the technique, and then you can go anywhere and sit down and play the piano. The same thing applies for cooking. And again, if they don't stay within the cooking realm, they can use that same style, that same approach of discipline and learning about their trade from the ground up to then master it, to master those skills. So many of my students have really not encountered much success in their lives. They didn't necessarily have nagging parents to help prep them for a job interview, or they haven't experienced much triumph in their life. And to watch them on a daily basis experience these small victories, just learning how to make a bechamel or perfect a risotto, or in my crowning achievement is always getting them to eat beets.
Really?
Yes.
They don't like beet.
You can come to my house and teach me that.
Oh my gosh. And it's a joke. And we've got this, they talk about Chef Laura's life-changing beets. It'll really change your life once you learn how to cook them properly, or any vegetable. Usually my students have a list of vegetables they won't eat, but I'm secretly writing that down because those are the very vegetables I'm going to get them to love. And 9 out of 10 times they do. And that's a triumph for me. And just to see the looks on their faces when they master that is wonderful.
We have something here at our podcast that we call the Veggie Challenge. Isn't that what you're thinking, Jill, about our Veggie Challenge?
Well, I'm just wanting to know how she cooks beets.
Well, let's start with that. How do you cook beets?
Well, many different ways. I will tell you, though, one of the best ways to eat them, I do put them in chocolate cake, but just beets by themselves, roasted beets, I pickle beets a lot. And I shred the beets. Yeah. I shred them. You can put them into risotto, put them into veggie pancakes. But roasted beets, of course, with some goat cheese and some toasted pine nuts or walnuts is the best way to go. But pickling the beets and having that alongside some good barbecue it's just fantastic. I get people every time.
My mother used to make pickled beets when I was a child. That was one of her favorite things to make.
Yes.
And she'd throw the eggs in there, hard-boiled eggs in there, too.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So, yes, we are doing a veggie challenge. So with our listeners and members of our group, and the point is to we started off saying let's eat a new vegetable a week, but there really aren't that many new vegetables if you're already eating vegetables, So anyway, we changed it to either a new vegetable or a new way of preparing a tried and true vegetable. And that's been kind of fun. And the one thing I did realize is that most of the vegetables that are new to me are much more expensive than the vegetables that I normally buy.
Yes,
so
that's quite true. That's quite true. And that's an issue of supply and demand. Often I will buy parsnips, one of my favorite root vegetables, and the young lady or young man at the checkout will ask me what these are. I said, well, they're parsnips.
Really?
Yes. And it's funny that parsnips, turnips, rutabagas are, considered peasant food. That's in the old world, and they were plentiful and nobody wanted to eat them. And here they're considered unusual. They're just not grown that much because the demand for them isn't that high. So they're more expensive.
Right.
But I think
Right.
that, exposing people to many different kinds of fruits and vegetables as possible. It's absolutely my life mission at this point. And it ties back so much into health. And something else that I experienced that I really come to every time I talk about treating illness with food and how important that is, and all the sensitivities rather, and allergies that we encounter today. I had my own bout with illness that I was able to deal with primarily through food, but also stress reduction, which is the answer seemingly to every ailment, but isn't always easy. And that was chronic fatigue syndrome and leaky gut syndrome.
Oh, no.
And the number of people that I've encountered with similar battles, similar symptoms. And we thought, my gosh, food has got to be the answer. What we've done to our food system in just the last century is astounding when we think about it. And I continue to kind of go down this road of research and asking questions about what is it that we've done to our food system that parallels what is happening to our bodies across a broad spectrum in our emotional and physical health. And I really have an inkling that there's a direct correlation.
So how would you describe our modern food system, that, the changes that have happened?
Oh, unfortunate.
How do you mean?
We're so far removed from where our food comes, and something as simple as a chicken. The way we buy chicken and the way our grandparents or great grandparents would have raised their own chickens, butchered their own chickens. I use this example with my students to really try to get them to understand. I use milk, cow's milk, as an example. 100 or so years ago, we each would have had our own small working farm, perhaps. We each had our own dairy cow. And the number of steps in between your breakfast table and that fresh milk, maybe just 2. You might go to your barn, milk the cow every morning, and bring the milk to your breakfast table. So it didn't change hands. It was just you and the cow and your table and your immediate family. And at some point, people got the idea to work smarter, not harder. And maybe one person in the village took care of all the cows because maybe he or she had the best grazing pasture. And then everyone would purchase the milk from that one supplier, which is wonderful, and it makes a lot of sense. But now you grow that to a broader spectrum. You have dairy cattle and milk now from thousands of different farms all going into one system. And if there's contamination now you're not just maybe contaminating your family with that one dairy cow that's ill. Now you have the potential to contaminate thousands and thousands of people. And that's what we give up. The convenience and the lower prices, but we also take on greater risk. And wonderful things like pasteurization. There's things that I don't think we're really taking into consideration that have, on one hand, saved thousands of lives by preventing outbreaks of listeria. But what is it that we're doing on the other hand that might be damaging our health long term? There are great movements in this country to buy, certainly local, that's very common, and to really know where your food comes from. And I truly believe that we are meant to eat all of these products, but within reason, and really get a better idea of where our food comes from, and be more respectful of our food and the people who produce it, and be willing to pay a good price for good food. We should be willing to invest the money up front in good health and not have to invest the money later on in poor health and in medical bills. But it's a struggle. And I think that what our grandparents and great-grandparents wouldn't recognize as food today is primarily what we are eating with our Western diet.
So you said, I think we should be eating all of those foods. What do you mean?
Everything. I'm absolutely an omnivore. I certainly don't subscribe to one diet or another, but I think there's room in our diet for every kind of a creature and every kind of fruit and vegetable. And that's my opinion about it.
Right.
But I think that the pendulum has swung so vastly to kind of the other side that we're just eating way too much of the wrong things.
So do you mean the people that eat exclusively vegan or exclusively keto or exclusively anything, I guess? So you think it should be a mixture of everything?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's what our bodies, I feel as though we're putting the wrong fuel in our bodies. It's almost akin to putting diesel fuel in your vehicle by accident. I don't think that our bodies have evolved to eat Doritos. As delicious as they are sometimes, I don't think our bodies have caught up with this modern food system. Our bodies are still thinking, where's all the fiber? Why aren't you eating unprocessed, naturally occurring fruits and vegetables and proteins?
You mean parsnips and turnips and rutabagas?
Yes.
And not Doritos and Cheetos and
but they're
Tostitos.
So good sometimes.
So if I could restate that for a minute, I think what you're saying is your recommendation is, or your thought is, to eat everything across the spectrum of food with an emphasis on whole, unprocessed foods. So fruits, vegetables, meat, dairy products, so that the emphasis on that kind of thing rather than on buying frozen pizza or the Doritos or Pop-Tarts or Lucky Charms.
And anything that comes with a nutritional label. That's kind of, if you think of it there, nothing, to paraphrase Michael Pollan, nothing in the fruit and vegetables section. It has a barcode on it, but it doesn't have a nutritional label on the side of that apple. It's an apple, and eating more, and it's easier said than done for sure. I'm guilty of having all kinds of frozen stuff in my freezer right now as a single mom. That's just easy, for the kids, and they're not interested in beets all the time.
Sure.
That's just the reality. That's the reality.
Right. So as far as what we should eat, there's a line there where you can cross over with too much packaged foods, too many artificial foods that are kind of created rather than just the basic food that
been grown.
Okay, grown. That's the key.
Yes. Absolutely.
So as far as the grown foods, I've heard a lot of opinions on both sides about the GMOs. I was wondering, I'm sure you have an opinion about it, and I was wondering if you could kind of give us the pros, cons, lay it out, what your thoughts are.
Yes. I actually do a class. I teach a class called GMOs versus organics. And this is certainly a topic that the more I learn about it, the more I am I haven't come down on one side or the other, because like anything that's science-based, we're going to continue to have more information. I certainly would avoid, if I could entirely, I would probably avoid GMOs just out of the idea that I don't like everything that comes along with it, pesticides and runoff. And I don't think that genetically modified organisms are really living up to what a lot of the producers said would happen, which was the idea of curing world hunger. However, I do think there's certainly room in the scientific community for GMOs in terms of disease research, and I don't think it's a good idea to shut the door entirely on anything like that. I think there's a lot of confusion out there about GMOs versus organics. Is one healthier? Is it not? And it's a lot to unpack. For sure. I think the effects on growing genetically modified organisms are pretty detrimental. And I don't know that the food itself inherently is unhealthy. I think it's the byproduct of the mass production, the fuel consumption and what the government subsidizes in terms of the corn and soy that's grown. And the corn and soy, which is primarily GMO in this country, which winds up in the middle of the grocery store as our, Cheez-Its and potato chips, which we love so much. And
corn and soy is in just about everything.
Everything.
If it's a prepared food, it's corn and soy.
Absolutely. And that key to what you said is it's a prepared food. And I think right now we have, if I go to Whole Foods around dinner time or Heinen's or any of these wonderful grocery stores, the prepared food section blows my mind. And the number of people shopping, it blows my mind. And I thought, do people really not have the time? I feel as though I don't have the time. As a chef, when I come home from work and I'm exhausted, I don't necessarily want to stay on my feet for another hour or two. It is a battle to carve out time to eat healthy. It absolutely is. And when someone tells me they don't have enough time to cook healthy, I don't initially disagree. But finding time once or twice a week to cook and just avoiding foods, knowing more about what you're eating and that it could be causing some health issues. Knowledge is absolutely power. And it comes down to it's really actually pretty simple. Just feeding our bodies what we're meant to eat. And we all know inside we're not meant to eat Klondike bars. We know. We're smart. We absolutely. I think another part of telling your food what to do and controlling your food, it's because you're putting it in your body, and if you will operate better and you will feel better and you will be able to function better in all other areas of your life if you give your body what it needs. But I'll tell you, don't avoid, I eat chocolate every single day, and I don't feel badly about it, but I go buy really good chocolate and I know what goes into it and I know the person who's producing it, and I don't have an ounce of guilt about it.
So chocolate would definitely be on your list of foods to eat, but it has to be that really dark chocolate.
Yeah.
Is that right?
No.
Okay.
Not all that. Well, only because I do avoid dairy. I avoid dairy and gluten. I'm one of those people because it could be dark chocolate just because I prefer dark chocolate, and chocolate, remember, is a fermented food. So you can throw it into that category.
Wait a second. I never thought of chocolate as a fermented food.
It is. It sure
that's
is.
good. So
And
if you're supposed to eat one fermented food a day, it could be chocolate.
There you go.
Well, Laura, if you don't mind me backing up a little bit, there was something you said a few minutes ago about you had some serious illness.
Yes.
And you figured out ways to overcome that. And, if you're not comfortable sharing it, that's fine. But if you wouldn't mind just going back to that and talking a little bit more about that, I think that might be helpful.
Oh, I don't mind at all. So I was about 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with mono, and then I had another recurrence of it, and I was 39 years old. I thought, where did this come from? And at the time, I had a 1.5-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. And my physician said, well, you're exhausted. I said, well, I know I'm exhausted, but something's wrong. I had been a marathon runner for over 2 decades, and I found myself not being able to walk around the block with the kids in the stroller without collapsing. And so that something is seriously wrong. Around the same time, though, I started working for mustard seed, and I would encounter many people coming in with a long list from their physician about what they could eat, what they couldn't eat, with symptoms very similar to mine. And I thought something's wrong, something's going on. And after about 6 or 8 months of blood tests and seeing an immunologist, and I finally wound up at the Center for Integrative Wellness, where the physician took one look at me and she said, I think you're reacting to dairy and wheat. I thought, no, there's no way.
Wow.
And blood test came back. Sure enough, I was reacting to dairy and wheat. I was also extremely, extremely depressed, very sick. I had intense vertigo. I had a hard time driving to work and back. I had a hard time sometimes navigating through a doorway.
Wow.
Without running into it. I just became more and more ill. And I don't mind sharing, I was also gearing up to go through a pretty ugly divorce. So and changing jobs. And in the midst of all this, the physicians, we said, we're diagnosing you with chronic fatigue syndrome. I said, well, I'm tired, but that doesn't explain my flu-like symptoms, the vertigo. She said, no, that's all part of it. And the leaky gut syndrome too. So essentially the proteins from the dairy and the wheat were leaching through my stomach lining and getting into my bloodstream and causing almost an allergic reaction. When I cut the dairy and wheat out of my diet, within weeks, the fog began to lift. I began to feel better. At that point, I'd gone on FMLA and I was in bed for almost 3 months. During that time, I slowly came up out of this fog. I was able to stay awake probably at that point for about 6-8 hours a day. I increasingly got better though, restricting my diet and changing jobs, making a lot of decisions in my life that resulted in being lifted out of this illness. I will never be a runner again, for sure. I have very limited energy capacity, but coming through that and coming through the other side and really understanding how much diet can affect a person, it was absolutely remarkable for me.
Wow, it sounds like your diet saved your life.
It did. It was pretty amazing. But boy, do I miss butter.
Oh,
yeah, butter, yeah.
That was a rough, and if there is my mother-in-law sort of, she recommended a documentary called Unrest on PBS through Independent Lens, which is difficult to watch, but incredible in terms of how many people around the globe suffer from these autoimmune disorders. And I feel really darn fortunate that I have almost entirely recovered, because not everyone does. And it's pretty scary. And I was a marathoner. I ran every day. Wow. And I had energy to spare. And now my mother was very healthy for a 74-year-old. She has more energy than I do. And I will never be the same person in terms of being able to work 10, 12-hour days and come home and go for a run and work in the garden. And that'll never be me, but it's a fair trade for the life that I have now. Mm-hmm. A healthier life for sure.
So no gluten and no dairy.
Correct. Yes.
Well, you're right. There are some things there I'm sure you miss. And butter would be one of them.
Yes.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
We were talking about the GMOs versus organics, or that's what you said your classes, and we talked a bit about the GMOs. But what about organics? What do you recommend? I mean, should everything be organic, or what's your thoughts on organic foods?
Well, ideally, and this is one of my fantasies in life, is to be able to go grocery shopping and buy everything organic and not break into a cold sweat at the checkout. But things in terms of berries or anything that does not have a thick skin that you would throw away, like a banana or an orange, that you're going to peel that off. You're not going to eat the skin. Right. Things like berries that are going to absorb everything that comes at them. There's a list, and I can't, tick it off at the top of my head at the moment.
Clean 15 and the dirty dozen.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. I think organic as much as possible.
Okay. And what about meat? You keep hearing about eating grass-fed beef or organic chicken.
Yes. Anything. I think, first of all, the way we approach meat is and I think everyone has heard the phrase, the Western diet. And right. Essentially, it's easiest to describe it, you would have this enormous, maybe porterhouse steak on a plate with some sad-looking green beans and maybe a baked potato. And
yeah, with butter and sour cream.
Yes, that's representative of the American diet, and it really needs to be reversed. And really focusing on meat being more of a flavoring. We certainly don't need to eat meat at every meal. And I know most Americans would absolutely make me, give up my American card just from saying that. But it is so important to kind of refocus our shift to primarily vegetables and grains, and potatoes certainly aren't off limit. There are cultures that have existed on potatoes for thousands of years with just a smattering of meat. And I think that approach is best. When I do buy meat, I absolutely will buy, when possible, organic, grass-fed, free range. I don't buy a lot of it because it's expensive, but it's supposed to be expensive. It's a luxury, and it ought to be seen as one. And I enjoy every bite of it. And it's more of a flavoring than anything else. But I make absolutely I make a point to buy local if possible, but I need to know where the meat comes from. And I'm not going to buy a lot. That's for sure.
And seafood, I assume.
Oh gosh. Salmon. I teach a seafood class, and we always talk about salmon. And they butcher the salmon, and they skin the salmon, they portion the salmon, but we also talk about sustainability and where it comes from. And that is one food item that I absolutely have a little bit of guilt when I'm eating is salmon, but I don't eat it that often. And wild caught versus farm raised, and really understanding the environmental impact. Every time I eat farm raised salmon, wild caught is preferred, but it's a treat. I would buy salmon, and my kids do love salmon. I would buy it a few times a year, and it's going to be quality, and I know where it comes from. I try not to feel too badly about the salmon.
So you said we don't need to eat meat at every meal, but do you eat meat once a day or once a week? Or I don't mean it to be a prescription, but I'm just curious.
You know what? I think I eat meat or most any food when I feel like I need it. I absolutely will have a craving for beef. Absolutely. And so I will say, we're going to have some steaks tonight. I'm going to go to Heinen's and purchase some really good steaks, and I'm not going to look at the price, but they're fabulous, and I'm going to eat them. I will say one of my weaknesses is bacon. I love bacon. And if it's around me every day, I'd eat a piece or two of bacon every single day. Sometimes that's the only actual meat I'm eating during, that day. I get protein from other sources, a lot of grains and legumes, peanut butter, but I don't think about it. And I think that's what's really been freeing. And with a lot of women, probably every woman dabbled in an eating disorder. Probably it happened in college. We all did, probably. And as soon as I stopped focusing on it so much and focusing on all these other things that brought me a lot of joy, I'm like, well, who cares? And that's when I actually started to love my body the most, actually post children, as I love my figure now more than I ever did. And I don't think about it nearly as much. And I think letting go of this obsession over food and focusing on it, get obsessed about your artwork or your writing or your gardening or your swimming or your Mahjong club. Stop focusing so much on the food, and then you kind of reset yourself, and your body will tell you what you need and when you need it.
Interesting. That's good.
Yeah, that's interesting because we've heard that from a number of our experts that we've interviewed.
That's it. And easier said than done.
Right.
Oh,
right.
Absolutely. And when we're tired, that's the worst. When I want to eat, one of my other weaknesses is grocery store cake and frosting. I don't know why. When I'm exhausted, when I was pregnant, I craved that. I don't know why. I didn't give into it that often, but I think when I'm tired, I tend to make poor decisions in general.
Yeah.
And that's when I kind of think, I'm just going to eat this entire tub of hummus, and I have 2 gin and tonics, and that's my meal. That's terrible.
Yeah, that's terrible.
It is. But then I go to bed, and the next day is a new day.
Well, I know that you teach several classes, and there's one that's called the cooking hypothesis. And I don't know what that means or what it is, but can you shed some light on that? Is that something that we should know about?
That is what I briefly touched upon initially about being able to harness fire and being able to cook. could suddenly eat our food cooked versus raw. What that did for us as a species did several things. Cooked food is much safer to eat, for sure. If anyone has had food poisoning, they'll never forget it.
Right.
And imagine what food poisoning would do to somebody several thousand years ago. It could, serious, it could certainly kill you. A nursing mother, if we think about today, there's this time frame in which we feel like, well, you need to wean that child and get the baby on solid foods. Those solid foods are actually cooked, pureed foods. You would have had no means of doing that if you couldn't cook. So you were nursing your child for a long, long time until that child had teeth to be able to
gnaw on
eat.
an apple.
Exactly. So, and the amount of time, if you had to eat a bag of carrots in order to get enough calories to sustain you through your morning, it's a lot easier and much more delicious if you could cook those carrots. And you could eat them much more quickly, and those vitamins and nutrients are going to get into your system more quickly, into your brain more quickly than if you had to eat that bag of carrots raw. And think about how your jaw would feel. This is why a primate has to spend, his waking hours just eating, chewing and chewing. Being able to cook our food not only made it safer, made women to be able to cook food for their infant to wean that child sooner. You could have more children then. It really gave us a way to get those important amino acids that you would derive from cooked meat to your brain and all those good fats. So our brains grew. Our jaws and teeth got smaller and our brain cavity got larger because of the ability to consume more food more often in higher amounts of fat and protein. And it's that fat and protein that's really key. Mm-hmm. Eating raw steak, even for a dog, takes a lot longer than a cooked steak just because of the nature of it. Yeah, and you need those proteins to be denatured or to be cooked or broken down. If you can cook them before they hit your gut has to work a lot less hard to break those nutrients down for your body to take them in. So many changes happen, and that's that hypothesis that cooking changed us and put us on the evolutionary fast track compared to our...
Thank you. That's interesting. Yeah.
So, do you have an opinion about artificial sweeteners?
Yes, I call it rat poison.
Wow, that's harsh.
It is. Well, gosh, but why artificial anything? Why? Really, artificial vanilla. Oh my gosh. It's why do anything artificial when you could have the real thing? And understanding how to use the real thing and approaching from a science perspective in terms of baking and pastry, sugar performs in such a way that substituting it out, you're not going to get the same effect. Granulated sugar is specifically formulated to have a crystal size and a melting point so that it can be used in cakes and confections and pastries. That's why you get that beautiful result. And make it and eat it and appreciate it, then be satisfied. An artificial sweetener is not going to give you that same satisfaction as you would a quote unquote natural sweetener. That's another lecture topic that everyone loves is sugar and what's a healthy sugar and what's a healthy fat. And it's a lot to kind of wrap our heads around.
Right. Well, you hear about so many folks being on the scale of prediabetes or actually have diabetes, and that sugar is the evil. And so that leads you to artificial sweeteners. But on the other hand, if the artificial sweeteners don't satisfy, you're kind of on this merry-go-round of trouble.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Paying attention to, of course, to what is converted to sugar in our bodies too. Your body runs on sugar. Your brain runs on glucose.
Sure. Right.
And you have to have, and we know that's, oh gosh, I've got a craving for sugar. Your body is desiring it. And since birth, we are predisposed to want sugary things. There's sugar in breast milk. And so the baby is going to crave and want to latch on. And if you offer a baby pureed pears or pureed spinach, we can be pretty sure that baby's going to want the pears. That's what we want. Bitter tasting foods are kind of a warning sign for something that might be toxic to humans, things that are sweet and fatty, those are nutrient rich and dense. And those are the things we always want. The problem is our brains and our bodies today, they haven't caught up. We don't realize that there isn't a plethora of food waiting around the corner at all times. Our bodies still think, oh my gosh, what if there isn't a next meal? So you go into almost a panic mode, and you want to load up on those calorie and nutrient dense foods, which are usually high in sugar and fat. And it's a matter of the brain in our head has to be in communication with the brain in our gut to assure the brain in our gut that there is in fact a next meal. We don't have to eat all 6 cupcakes. We can save one for tomorrow. But it is a constant battle internally.
Yeah, probably one of those things where you have to have gotten used to living the way you said, which is to remove the focus from food before many of us would have a hard time with having the 6 cupcakes and thinking, I don't have to eat these all.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, that takes a while sometimes.
Well, our podcast is designed for women that are over 50 who want to be fit and healthy. And I'm wondering if there's certain ways that you prepare foods that might be particularly important for women over 50, or certain foods that you would suggest for women over 50. And maybe it's just all the foods for everyone.
I think it is simplicity is best. And when my students first begin cooking with me, and we look at the recipes that we're going to prepare together, and I teach them, it's a pretty short amount of time that I have to teach them all the different cooking methods, introduce them to protein and vegetable and starch cookery. And they look at these recipes and they said, well, this looks really bland. And we cook mainly with fresh cracked pepper, kosher salt, maybe some fresh herbs. And I always chuckle a little bit because I hear this all the time. And then we cook the food and they're amazed. I said, all you're doing is bringing out the natural flavors of the food. It's very simple. And I think the tendency is to grab all the spices on the spice shelf and just start concocting something, and not really focusing on the food that you're cooking and the best cooking method to bring out the natural flavors of that food. So whenever you're cooking, no matter what it is knowing how to cook that specific vegetable or that starch specifically. I think meat inherently tastes good. Even my dad is allowed to grill a steak. That's the only thing he's allowed to do, because we've concluded that he can't cook anything, can't be trusted to cook anything else. But a steak is inherently delicious. What's harder to understand is why an Idaho potato cannot perform the same way a Yukon Gold will perform. And they have different applications. Green vegetables versus non-green vegetables or greens, and understanding proper cooking methods just to bring out those great flavors. People are obsessed with Brussels sprouts and cauliflower, and it's on every menu in every restaurant, along with beets. And my mind is blown that anyone would pay $8.99 for a side of cauliflower. But I'll tell you, I've watched people turn their noses up at raw cauliflower, but when we roast the cauliflower with olive oil, kosher salt and pepper, nothing more, and rely on that caramelization of that vegetable, I can't keep it in stock. It's gone. Even my kids will eat it all just from introducing a cooking method. And it's very simple. And that is the way I would always encourage people to eat, no matter what the age, and enjoy doing it and enjoy the preparation of it, even if you can only do it once or twice a week.
Right.
Okay.
That's great.
Laura, we have a question that we ask all our guests, and so I'm going to ask you. How do you define fit?
Wow, great question. Well, I could say being fit, now everyone has their different level of what an active day is for them. As I said before, that definition for me has changed. But if you're fit, you ought to be able to enjoy, I think, all the activities that you want. You ought to be able to easily go up and down the stairs every day, or go to work or take a walk without feeling horrible. And I think physically fit is completely tied to being mentally and emotionally fit. They all go together. And if you take one of them out of that, off that three-legged stool, maybe, you can't function. So being physically fit absolutely, I think, is a requirement for being emotionally and mentally fit. But it doesn't mean that you're running marathons or you are, doing, rowing every weekend or something. It's got to be defined for each person. I think everyone needs the freedom to figure out what that is. And I think a big part of being emotionally fit is stepping away also from things that make us feel emotionally unfit, which includes a lot of social media. I hate to say it sometimes, but the social media, TV for sure. I haven't had cable in years. And do I feel myself teetering back into that kind of glum, feeling less than self if I'm watching cable TV at someone else's house, or if I'm on Instagram or Facebook too long. I can feel it.
Right.
And that's not good. And being able to recognize, I think, those triggers, whether it's food or exercise or what have you, being really present and being able to understand what it is that you need to kind of limit maybe in your life in order to retain that physical, mental, and emotional fitness is really important. And I don't think anyone at any age is ever too old, or nobody's ever late to the game in terms of figuring that out. And it may mean not enjoying fatty foods with friends anymore, or not, doing things that are just not inherently healthy for them. And that takes a level of bravery too, I think.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very thoughtful answer. Really appreciate it, because we all are trying to figure out what fit means for each of us. And I find it very helpful to hear someone else's version. We really appreciate you coming on the show, Laura, and talking with us and with our listeners. If someone wanted to reach out to contact you, would it be appropriate for them to have your email?
Absolutely.
Or maybe
Absolutely.
Follow you on social media. I know you just said too much social media is bad. But I think we do have your Instagram address. Is that all right if we link it in the show notes?
Absolutely. That would be fantastic. I actually have met some really interesting women through that Instagram account along this journey, and that has been absolutely worthwhile.
Great.
Well, so what is your Instagram name?
It's Ask Chef Laura.
Okay.
And we'll have that in the show notes. So if any of our listeners want to contact her, either with the email, which is also askcheflaura@gmail.com, or the Instagram @askcheflaura. So again, thank you so much for coming and for sharing your information with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Likewise.
All right. We'll talk again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Will do.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I enjoyed hearing Laura's thoughts on selecting and preparing foods, green vegetables and greens, preparing the different types of potatoes differently, how to bring out the flavors in each type of food.
Yeah, she sure is knowledgeable and had some great ideas. I know that I love roasted vegetables and how they bring out the flavor of foods. That's been one of the cooking methods that I prefer for many of my vegetables.
Yes, we've been doing that Veggie Challenge here on Becoming Ellie with our community for about 6 months, and I'm really enjoying trying new things. I'd like to encourage our listeners to shoot us an email about their favorite vegetable.
You can leave us a message on our phone voicemail by calling 330-970-6662. That number is also on our website.
www.becomingellie.com. If you haven't been there yet, you'll want to read the many articles and sign up for our mailing list.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can do that wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yes, that's right. Thank you for listening. Join us for the next episode of Fit Strong Women Over 50.
Yep, see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.